Hi, everybody. All right, last one. A little bit of housekeeping here. This is not terribly relevant for today, but for those of you that are going to be here tomorrow, you all have badges that you're wearing, right? And they're all right now just sitting on your cute little tum-tums, not doing anything for anybody. Why don't you take that badge? Everybody, can you hold up your badge for a minute? And just spin it around so that it's hanging off your back. This way, the people behind you can know who you are and talk to you and say your names after the talk or tomorrow or at the happy hour or anything like that, right? This conferences are about meeting people. This is a good way to meet people. At least people will know your names. All right, nice job, everybody. This is an ad for Randolph Radio in 1923. It's a pretty typical ad for what ads would look like in those days. It's pretty feature-centric, right? No batteries, chargers, eliminators, acids, or liquids. Pretty straightforward. 7 tubes, single control. Try it for 30 days free before you buy. No frills, no feelings. In those days, a copywriter's job was to take the features of a product like this and just really what the client wanted to say and just type it out, type a headline and type some body copy. Then they'd hand it to an account executive. They'd run it to another floor. They'd slide the paper under the door to the art department, and the art department would visualize the ad. It was very rare that the copywriter would actually meet the designer or the art director that was working on the ad. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound like your job? Hopefully not. Now that all changed industry-wide when these two guys came along, Paul Rand and Bill Bernbach. See, the accepted truth of advertising was that copy was the idea, it was the big thing, and the art was just the visuals. That didn't matter. But these guys thought, sometimes the visuals could be the idea, and sometimes the copy was the visual, and oftentimes both of those things. See, Paul Rand said about working with Bill Bernbach, he said, "This is my first encounter with a copywriter who understood visual ideas and who didn't come with just a yellow copy pad and a preconceived notion of what the layout should look like. And contrary to the dynamic at the time, the very siloed dynamic, they would take lunch breaks together, they'd go to visit museums together and galleries, they became good friends, they were BFFs. And likely because of that close bond, they started making ads like this. This is an ad for Lee hats. Now rather than saying, it's a hat, it has a brim, it has a top, it covers your head, you won't get rained on. The ad celebrates the brand instead. It's a brand that people could see themselves being part of. So if we read the copy here, it's a bit small, but the copy here says, there's one way to stop inflation, perhaps the only way, and that's by production, and more production. Not just lip service, but by digging in, by making things for people. Now this is an ad for Lee hats, remember? But the copy is about combating inflation. It's about something bigger. It's about a bigger idea. This was revolutionary for the time. Now this kind of thinking, actually literally Bernbach and Rand's professional descendants, their proteges, their inspirees, it led to ads that changed the face of advertising forever. You may not have seen this ad before, but chances are you probably have seen these ads. Right? Created by copywriter Julian Koenig and art director Helmut Krohn, at actually Bill Bernbach's agency, DDB, we can trace the industry-changing work right back to Bernbach and Rand and their idea of this idea of the creative team, the partnership between art director and copywriter. Now, there was another art director at DDB, his name's Bob Gage, and he described it this way. He said, two people who respect each other sit in the same room for a length of time and arrive at a state of free association where the mention of one idea will lead to another and then to another. The art director might suggest a headline, the writer might suggest a visual, the entire ad is conceived as a whole, it's holistic, and a kind of ping pong between disciplines. And isn't that what we want today? True collaboration with equals and partners, ideas that build off one another and lead to more and more ideas. Now, why does this seem so far away for a lot of us? Well, that's kind of what I want to talk about today, and I think we'll talk about that in 3 parts. So the first part, maybe the thesis of this talk, is that in order for us to enjoy the type of collaboration that produces amazing work, we have to change our work cultures, and we have to change our values, and we have to change the dynamic of our workplaces. Now, lots of teams think that the answer to all this is new process. We need a new process. If only we had a new process, we'd be able to crack this. It's not actually the case. What we don't realize is that process doesn't matter if we have the wrong dynamic. All right, and one of the main ways that we can do that is specifically to appreciate and respect the role that front-end developers have in making the type of design work that we do and product design work that we all do. I'm going to try and make a good case for why this respect for front-end developers specifically is the catalyst for better workplace dynamics, to celebrate the front-end developer. And then lastly, I'll try to share some actionable tips for how you as a designer or a developer or a designer or development manager, or maybe you as not a manager, can contribute to a work dynamic that encourages designers and engineers as equals. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So I'd love for you to be thinking about these 3 points and maybe what questions you have and about your workplaces. We'll save some time at the end for that if we can. All right, so I do a bit of work with organizations that need help creating design systems. That's been a common theme throughout the day, so I'm going to try to build on that too. And more importantly, how to improve the products that we build through design systems. And if there's one major commonality in the organizations that have a specific divide between design and development, it is this. Many of them use Zeppelin. Does anybody here use Zeppelin? A few? Please stop. Anybody here work for Zeppelin? Please stop. Hey, John ragged on Uniqlo before. It's my turn. Dinner's on us, Uniqlo and Zeppelin. If you don't know Zeppelin, designers can upload sketch files, Photoshop files, XD files into it, and it automatically generates specs, assets, code snippets for whatever platform you're using. iOS, web, Android. Sounds awesome, right? So why am I being so harsh on Zeppelin? Well, allow me to explain by way of analogy. The best way that I can think to explain this comes from this great book. It's called How to Sell Cocaine. It's by Kenny K. You can buy it on Amazon. Seriously, if you do, please use my affiliate link here. Where we got? There it is, affiliate link right there. I learned about that in the book, right? So sell pure, don't buff. Get credit for your sales. If you don't want to buy the book, but you still want some of the insights, you can follow How to Sell Powder on Twitter, the actual Twitter handle. And in the book, I learned about this concept, and this is a concept called the dead drop. And in the dead drop, what you do is you wire your money to an offshore bank account. And after the payment is verified, you're told to go to a location to pick up your drugs. Then, no physical encounter ever occurs. That's part of the beauty of this technique. Nobody is in the same place at the same time, so it's harder to get caught. Right? This is the best way to do transactions. You reduce your chances of physically getting caught because neither of you are there at the same time. And this sounds strangely close to the design process. Right? Designers are all, make sure the coast is clear. I'm going to leave my comps right there. Just walk away. And when the coast is clear, developers, got these comps, go and build them. No one will know. Why do we do this? This is crazy. Okay, before I go on, let me be serious for a minute. This example is totally tongue-in-cheek. Absolutely, the book is real. You can actually buy it, but it is satire. And the first page of the book says it is intended for entertainment purposes only. Substance abuse is very real. I certainly don't endorse it. If you or somebody that you know needs help with substance abuse, there are great places to get help. Please do that. Please seek that out. It's important. All right, so why do we treat design and development like an illegal transaction? Let's explore this a little bit. Clearly, this is on purpose, right? Here, I'll prove it. Here's Zeppelin's own website. Zeppelin cuts meetings in half. Sounds like a dead drop to me. Now, when I'm working with an organization that admits to having trouble collaborating, the first thing I recommend to them is stop using Zeppelin. So inevitably, the next question is like, okay, fine, let's say we stop using Zeppelin. Well, what do we do instead? What do we replace Zeppelin with? And that's a legit question. Right? For a lot of teams, Zeppelin is the source of truth. It's where we get all of the info, where everybody can go to find the information. And so teams are rightly asking, what do we replace Zeppelin with? And my answer is talking. So many teams look for a tool to be the source of truth. Zeppelin, it's not great. The next truth is that design system sometimes is also not great. In actuality, the team is the source of truth. The people working on the products are the source of truth. That's where you get the info. Documentation is almost never a good source of truth. All of our teams here probably claim to be agile. Probably all of our organizations have some agile transformation going on or have gone on recently. So why aren't we following agile tenets? This is the Agile Manifesto. Right? One of my favorite things about the Agile Manifesto is this line, the second one here, working software over comprehensive documentation. Documentation is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not as important as working software. The manifesto itself says it. Right? Farther down, it says, while we value the things on the left, working software, while we value the items on the right, comprehensive documentation, they're not as important to us as the things on the left, working software. But we don't really act that way in our industry. right? What do? If you look at the output that people are responsible for on the team, information architects making diagrams, strategists making brief, designers making comps, only one of these roles is really software, right? It's really the person writing the code that's actually making the software. Everybody else is making documentation for the software. Working software over comprehensive documentation, it doesn't really look like it in the way that we work. This is literally valuing comprehensive documentation over working software. Who often gets the least amount of time on projects? Developers. How can we say that we value that more? The irony is, if you're making a web product, there's only one role that you need for a team. All of these roles are ones that you want on a project, but you only need one. It's the person who can write HTML. That's all you need for a web product. Here, I'll prove it to you. In 2005, developer Noah Stokes created this site, or maybe designer Noah Stokes created this site. I'll give you a few seconds of silence to marvel at this wonder. Look at this thing. Now this is just HTML. There is not even a CSS file attached to this. That's not CSS transitions or anything like that. That is a marquee tag, my friends. Did Noah need a design comp? No. Could a designer make this better? Probably, yeah. But there's a good argument for why this is actually the best version of this site that you could imagine. Could an information architect make this better? Probably. Could more backend logic make this better? Probably. But all the things that I'm talking about are to make it better, not to make it. In order to make it, you just need to write some HTML. Design, IA strategy, those are all optimizations on software. And as every good programmer knows, you don't optimize first. There's nothing to optimize yet. You optimize after. What does a true web product look like? What does an MVP for a web product look like? A plain old HTML document. That's all you need. That's version 1. And so that leads us to our first important insight, I think, and maybe a hot take. If we're really going to change our workplace dynamics, then when it comes to making web products, front-end development is more important than visual design. Now, I say that as a visual designer, so it's hard to admit, but it's true. If we want our teams, our products, our attitudes, our cultures to improve, we have to accept this as fact. All right, on to the next thing that we need to change our minds about. It's this great article. The last year, developer Mandy Michael wrote this fantastic article called Is there any value in people who cannot write JavaScript? Where she lamented the fact that the majority of job openings out there currently necessitate JavaScript knowledge. Mandy also had a great episode on the Shop Talk show with Chris Coyer and Dave Rupert and Laura Schenk to really discuss this topic in more detail. It's a great episode. I recommend you listen to it if this topic is important to you. And I think part of the subtext that Mandy is raising here is this. Are HTML and CSS as important as JavaScript? And I say, heck yeah, right? Backend languages, and I sort of include JavaScript here now, just to kind of lump them in. Backend languages are incredibly powerful, but there's a reason that all of them have at least one method for outputting HTML. Unless you output HTML, whether it's echoing in PHP or returning in React or whatever language you're using, the product isn't a real web product until you put something on the screen that people can interact with. And what is that thing? It is always HTML. Whether it's generated by the client or the server or whatever, you need HTML to use anything on the web. So when I'm working with my apprentices or anybody that asks me what's the first thing they should learn, I say HTML, because if you're trying to make web products, all roads lead to HTML. All right, so then our second most important insight, if you buy that line of thinking, again, maybe a hot take, is that if we're really going to change our workplace dynamics, when it comes to making web products, front-end languages are more important than back-end languages. Okay, nobody stormed up. Oh, all right. Thank you, sir. Nobody has walked out in a storming fit of rage yet, so okay. That probably means you're all still with me or asleep. I'll take either. So what should we do with these insights? Well, this is one of my favorite books about branding. It's called The Brand Gap, and it's by Marty Neumeier. And lots of people, when they think about brand, they usually think it's a logo or it's a name or a corporate identity system. And those things are sort of wrapped up in branding, but that's not actually what a brand is. Marty's book clarifies what a brand is, right? It's none of those things. It's actually, a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, a service, or a company. In 1996, ValueJet Flight 592 was supposed to fly from Miami to Atlanta. And instead, it tragically crashed in the Florida Everglades, and there were no survivors among the 110 passengers and the crew. So after the crash, the FAA grounded ValueJet, for 3 months to do an investigation. And upon further investigation, what they found is that ValueJet was often very negligent in the way that they conducted business. They utilized dangerous cost-cutting measures. They didn't train employees well. They relied on cheap labor to do repairs on their planes. And they quickly developed a reputation for delinquent safety. So when people thought of ValueJet, they thought of untrustworthiness. That was the gut feeling people had about it. That was the brand of ValueJet. When they thought about ValueJet, they thought, I'm not sure that I want to fly ValueJet. So a year later, 1997, ValueJet acquired this small airline that no one had really heard of at the time, AirTran Airways. But even though it was such a smaller airline, they actually took AirTran's name. And the reason was because the name ValueJet was just so toxic to keep around. Right? The brand, the gut feeling, had become synonymous with danger. So they had to rebrand. They had to change people's gut feeling about it. That's what a rebranding is. How do you change someone's gut feeling about the product? And they couldn't do that with the name ValueJet. Now, unfortunately, there's another name that's starting to become toxic in our industry, too. It's well-intentioned, and it actually says what it means, front-end developer. But despite the best of intentions, our industry is starting to have the wrong gut feeling about people who work by this title. So I think it's time to rebrand the front-end developer. So let's take stock of what's working well and what's maybe not working so well. Right? The old stigma of this word, or maybe the current stigma of this phrase, is that a front-end developer has maybe not so useful skills. Right? What's more important to us right now? Well, JavaScript, and front-end developers don't know a lot of JavaScript. They value these older things like HTML and CSS. And we know that those things are important, but maybe the rest of the industry doesn't. Right? A lot of people also consider people who write HTML and CSS, and I consider myself as part of this crowd, that you're not real programmers. You're not writing real programming languages. What do we want, though? We want people to see this term, this phrase, this title as important, as valuable, right? Maybe it's not real programming, sure, we can agree to that, but it's something equally as valuable. We want to be involved, we want front-end developers to be involved in product vision. We want them to be involved in creating user interfaces, right? We want them involved in all of those things. We want to communicate that this person is involved in all of those things. And if you think about it, you'll realize that a lot of organizations have a word for this already. All the things in that right column there. We have a word for that. And that word is designer. When I'm working with teams that want to be more collaborative and work more closely in making web products, one of the first things I suggest to them is take all your front-end developers, move them off the development team, put them on the design team, and start calling them designers. Now, sometimes it takes a little time to warm up to that idea. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time to even implement that idea. But it's amazing to see how much confidence a front-end developer gets when people think of them and when they think of themselves as designers, because that's shorthand for all the stuff on the right. You're important. What you do is valuable here. We want you involved in vision. We want you involved in creating the interface. We want you involved in that level. It's easy to justify, too. Let's take a look at what a design team might look like. So if you look across your current design team, maybe you have a designer, Kate, and Kate is really good at using Sketch. Great, Kate's a great designer for you. Maybe another designer, Miles. Miles is great at using Photoshop. Miles on the design team, Miles gets a lot of stuff done just like Kate does. Another designer, Kamala, she uses Figma, right? So you have people on your design team that are doing great things. It's easy to justify how former front-end developer Jane can join this team too. All these people design interfaces for users. Kate uses Sketch, Miles uses Photoshop, Kamala uses Figma, Jane uses HTML and CSS. They're design tools to make designs. All of them make interfaces, all of them use different tools. But because they're all different, they're all the same. Well, what's that, you say? Oh, everybody on your design team uses Sketch. Because it's more efficient when everybody else is alike, right? When everybody's doing the same thing. You're right. That would make it difficult for Jane, who uses HTML and CSS as her design tool, to join this team because she's different than everybody else. And that is how easy it is to end up with a non-diverse team. When you force people, or worse, when you encourage them to think and act the same and group together, it very obviously leaves out the ones that aren't like everybody else. It creates outcasts. It creates stale and mundane thinking. But if you think about it this way, if you can shape a group with different skills, different backgrounds, different approaches, different technologies, now you have something really special. This is a really effective way to design a team. Right? Let's compare this to the way that we think about our typical teams. We try to make the categories really specific, but the skills really broad within them. Like, for example, if you're a visual designer, you have to be all of a visual designer. And this never works because people don't fit nicely into boxes like this, right? Inevitably, you have a visual designer that does, I do a little bit of UX, but I'm not really sure how to art direct very well, right? A lot of people see that person as, well, not quite a full visual designer. And it's not that they're not quite a full visual designer, they just don't fit into that box. If you slid the box over, they would fit really nicely into that one. Or maybe a front-end developer that doesn't know JavaScript but is really into deployment tools. Their skill set is spread across the spectrum. Again, they don't fit into the boxes that we like, the boxes that we incentivize. But they shouldn't need to. So rather than making the boxes really specific and trying to fill them broadly, let's do it the other way around. Let's do it opposite. Make the roles broad and fill them specifically. So what could that look like? Well, one configuration that I've recommended is that every maker on the team is either just called a designer or an engineer. Right? Those are the two broad boxes. And think of this more of a spectrum. It's not a binary. It's not this or that. It's a spectrum. Right? And then plot the people on your team, not the roles, but the actual people. Think of it like a heat map. Kate here, she lives on kind of this spectrum on the side of design and engineering. She's a strong user interface designer. She can do a lot of UX thinking on her own. She can even tweak some CSS, right, to get the details right if somebody else initially writes it. She can't write CSS on her own, right? That's why it's yellow as opposed to red. It's a heat map here. But this is a better representation of skills. Miles here, right? Old school art director. He likes writing his own copy sometimes while doing broad stroke design, but he is the first to admit that he's not really good at the details. So working with somebody like Kate to flesh out the details is a good pairing. This already starts to show you how to shift the team dynamic to cater to the people who are on your team, not the roles that you'd like to fill. Jane here, as we talked about, does most of her designing in the browser with CodePen, with HTML and CSS. She knows a little bit about writing JavaScript from scratch, but she's pretty proficient at editing JavaScript and finding snippets on the web to drop in, copy, paste, modify. You see that Jane blurs the lines a little bit here between design and engineering, but because her skills fall more on the design end, she would prefer to be called a designer instead of an engineer. That's cool. You get the idea. This is a much more realistic visualization of your team's strengths and weaknesses. And this is just one version of a spectrum, right? This is a skill spectrum. And so you can have multiple spectrums. You have different ones. Keep your eye on the top axis here where it says design and engineering. If you prefer, we can map it to the delivery process if you want. Right? For example, planning, sketching, building, deploying, or whatever your team uses. And you'll see that this is much more of a continuum. And that's not specific sections. Planning blends right into sketching, which blends right into building. And you can really be creative about what fits nicely into this work, into your work culture. There's a great agency in Dayton, Ohio called Sparkbox, and they have these concepts that they call the hammer and the chisel. Now, these are not their job titles, mind you. They still have titles like front-end developer, or designer, or front-end designer, but hammer and chisel, it sort of describes how they think about their work. Let's watch a little video and listen to how they describe the difference.
The hammer puts in the overall HTML and CSS structure for our base of layout and overall look and feel of components of a website.
The chisel takes the hammer's work and refines it and makes it more polished and more closely aligned with the original design vision. If you use this approach, the client is in a better position to see the progress of the site and see like a lot more refinement happening throughout the process. They can kind of see their vision come to life more as opposed to just being more of like a skeleton of what the design was. They can see, actual full pieces being put together and refined to a highly detailed point.
So for you, you're free to use whatever suits your organization best, whatever fits nicely into your work culture. Now, once you have your whole team plotted here, you can use this visualization to actually expose gaps. So for example, you see there's a gap in sort of that bottom area there on the left. For example, your product manager, Wanda, might not have as much experience overseeing a design team as she does overseeing an engineering team. So maybe your next hire should be a person that has more experience running design, or maybe you borrow one temporarily from another team, or better yet, maybe you pay someone who's willing to get trained to do that job in the future. Another gap could be maybe at the end of your delivery process. Your engineers, Sam and Amadeus here, they don't have a lot of overlap in what they know about the build to deploy process. And so again, maybe that's somebody that you hire. Or maybe Amadeus is like, I would really love to learn that. Maybe you give Amadeus a week or two of vacation or training to learn that, to bone up on that before your next project. And this is not just a visualization for identifying skills gaps too. You can use it to identify all sorts of gaps. You can use it to say plot work experience. right? This could show you that you have maybe a pretty young team, so this is the amount of years that this person has been working. It could show you that you have a pretty young team, except for one person. Sam's been doing this for a long time, and that could be a reason that Sam's working style is different than everybody else. You can use these tools to help understand your team and create better experiences for them. Right? You can create better team dynamics between them regarding age, race, preferred lunch times, productive working hours, favorite projects, all sorts of stuff like that. And the better you understand your team dynamics, the better your team is going to function. All right, so if you're on board for all of that, if you understand and embrace that designers and front-end developers are part of the design tribe, and they should be on the front lines of delivering great software to users, that opens the door to a lot of possibilities. And so now that we've opened up those possibilities and changed the dynamic of our roles, let's talk about how we can have some liberty in how we do our work. And maybe the best way to explain this is actually to walk through what it looks like to make a product together. Right? We'll go kind of step by step. So let's say we're making a web app for cataloging events and tips. Well, where should we start? Now, if you thought the place we should start is, all right, well, fire open Sketch and fire open Photoshop, shame on you. This is the new world where we embrace real software. So we're not going to open a static tool. We're going to open a software tool, right? Where a visual designer may have opened a static tool like that, let's use this as an opportunity for a former front-end developer, now a designer, to begin the design process. Right? And already we're shifting the dynamic about how we typically get work done. So the first thing that we do if we're making this product is let's open a code editor instead, and let's start writing some code. What we're going to do is we're going to create a logged-in version of this homepage for cataloging events. And the first thing that we can do there is just write a list of the jobs that this page should be doing. Right? So we'll write some plain text in an HTML document. You don't have to read this in particular, but it's just things like, the first thing the page should do is orient me so I know where I am, let me move around this website or this app how I want to. Some sections of this page should be, show me what just happened, or show me something fun that I already did, or tell me that that's all that there is here. And if you just copy and paste this text and save it as an HTML document, you get something in your browser that looks like this. Now, if you think back at the Noah Stokes example, this is it. This is your MVP. This is version 1. Version 1 is done. Now, it's not pretty, it's not useful, and it's not usable yet, but it's something. Right? This is what an MVP is. Everything else, remember, is an optimization. So now that we have version 1 done, now we can optimize. We can do information architecture and visual design and backend and all that stuff to optimize the experience. Right? This is an experience, not a great one. So let's make it better. So the first steps really now are about scaffolding, which is much easier and faster to do in code than in a graphics editor. And this is what it looks like to design in the browser. The developer can add some simple structure, like making each thing its own discernible block. So made each of these things a div, put a class of FPL on it, put a quick style of a light gray background on that, just so we can see and delineate the blocks. Right? And it's up to you where you're doing this. You can do this in a blank file in your local code editor or CodePen. You can do this in a library creator like Fractal or Pattern Lab, whatever else. It doesn't really matter at this stage. The important thing is that you're moving quickly and you're iterating as much as you can. Right? So this is the other thing to point out is you're working on the smallest screen possible, and that works to your advantage. I've taken my browser and shrunk it to the smallest point that it'll go, because it's sort of like a mobile-first design. Right? The page hierarchy works linearly. No need to worry about columns quite yet. It's all the benefits of creating mobile first. You have at your advantage. So this is version 2. Version 2 is done. Right? Just a little bit of scaffolding, and now version 2 is done. Save, commit to your Git repository, show your friends. Now what we can do is we can also translate some of the jobs that this page has to do into the features that actually do that job. So what we have here at the very top is, orient me so that I know where I am, and let me move around if I want to. That is a feature. That's not a component. It's not an element. What element on a page can do that? Orient me so I know where I am and help me move around. Well, maybe that's the header, right? Because the header has navigation in it. It has maybe the current page that you're on, right? So we can translate all of these jobs into actual elements on the screen. Show me something that's cool coming up, all right? That's a feature. What's the element? Well, for your consideration. Maybe we have a section that's called that, or we have past events, or we have coming up. Right? And now, version 3 is done. So we're just making these really small things, these small edits. Now, so far, this is something that a front-end developer has been leading the charge on, but the designer has been paying attention the whole time. Right? At any point along the way, the designer can revise the work. The designer might realize, well, maybe for your consideration, it isn't really more important than Blast from the Past. They actually have equal hierarchy. So can we put them kind of on the same spot on the page? What does that translate to in UI design and graphic design? Well, side by side. So yeah, the developer could put a couple columns around this thing, easily float some things or flexbox or grid or however you want to do this, right, in your prototyping environment. Great, there you go. Version 4 is done. And now think about here that the designer hasn't had a chance to revise this very, very early on, minutes into the design process. That's what collaboration looks like. It's not waiting for hours and hours for one person to finish their part and then you get to do your part. That's not what collaboration looks like. Collaboration looks like being able to change and edit things within minutes of how you're doing this, sometimes seconds of how you're doing this. Right? The whole time, the designer wasn't just sitting around either, and wasn't just looking over the shoulder, but the designer was working on some stuff in parallel. The beauty of this process is that you can work in parallel. So while the developer sets up the scaffolding or something like this, the designer can start playing around with maybe some general art direction, playing around with some styles, like this. Now this is just a screen grab from Photoshop. This is not a UI kit or a component library or nothing finished. This is a thing that I like to call an element collage. So imagine that you took a website, you printed out all the pages of the website, you cut them out, and you spread all of the parts on the table. Una was showing that kind of cut and paste exercise earlier. You spread them out on the table, and an element collage is just like that, except in reverse, right? Because you don't have the full website yet. So you're actually trying to do that process in reverse. It should be just enough exploration that everybody knows where you're headed. This is only a handful of elements, but let's list out all the things that we could even know just from something like this. We know the name of the app. We know maybe that's a logo. It's called Trippin'. It looks like there's like a rounded corner motif happening for major pieces of content, so that's good to know. Maybe that's a theme that exists throughout the app in terms of visual design. The typographic palette, we've got this kind of bold sans serif for headlines and a serif italic for some subheads. Okay, that's a good general theme there. The color palette has at least 4 major colors in it. Right? Those are good things to know that any good developer needs to know when they're making their work. So what's the difference between this and Zeppelin, though? Well, the difference is that the designer is going to be saying it to the developer because they're working together the whole time. They're not going to put it somewhere and hope that somebody picks it up. They're not going to dead drop it. They're actually going to use words from their mouths to say it. No one is left to their own devices. Everybody's talking about ideas as they happen and reacting to those ideas. That's what the collaboration process looks like. That's what design process should look like. Now, based on the little bit that's in that element collage, the developer could start to set up some tokens related to things like typography and colors. And those tokens might manifest as a, who knows, SAS file, a JSON file, a YAML file. It doesn't matter. Who cares at this point? Whatever you prefer. Now, Brad Frost talked about this earlier today with things about like Envision's Design System Manager, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But what's important here is that this becomes a file that the designer is in charge of. That's right, designer, you're going to have to learn some code, or at least code-like concepts. Do you really think that we're going to flip, going to change the front-end developer's world and you come out of this unscathed? I don't think so. Designers, this is new for you too, right? Get familiar with some SAS syntax, get a local build up and running, right? Those are daunting tasks at first, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you get into it. It's not asking a lot, only that first time. Welcome to the party. And once you get that up and running, you can tweak these tokens to your heart's content. No more hovering art director. Can we move that 4 pixels up, please? Oh, 3 pixels up. No, 4 pixels. Can we do 3.5? Is it 3.5 pixels? No half pixels? Right? Nobody likes that. Everybody hates that. Don't do that. You got a tokens file now. You want to change the rounded radius to 11? Go for it. The build is already reading this stuff in. Change it, publish it, deploy. The build already reads it in. Once you get this up and running, you can tweak to your heart's content. Rather than the developer being in charge of getting the design details right, now you have the power to do it. Right? Say goodbye to red lines. Say goodbye to Zeppelin. Just climb into the file and make the changes yourself. This is getting the designer. We talked a lot about getting the developer in the design process. But now we're going to do the other side. How do you get the designer part of the development process? Okay, so this is the current state of our product so far. This is my favorite part now, because this is really where it gets to start rolling. And probably, you might be an hour into this process for now. Now remember, the front-end developer is leading the charge. That's different. It's not the designer leading this. This is the front-end developer is leading this. Right? That means everyone here should be in service of the person leading the charge, in service of the front-end developer. And this is the question everyone on the team, not just the designer, the copywriter, the UX person, the strategist, the business analyst, all the people on the team should be asking the front-end developer, what do you need right now? What's on your list? What's coming up next? These are the magic words. What do you need right now? As a designer, I am constantly asking my developers what they need. My job is in service of theirs. I don't own this design, they do. I'm here to help them. And that's the rest of the team members' job too. They're making the software, remember? So let's help them. At this stage, the developer might say, well, I might need some copy for the footer. Cool, copywriter, can you get some copy ready for the footer? Maybe the copywriter's busy. Maybe you don't have a copywriter. Okay, product manager, can you make some copy for the footer? Maybe you don't have a product manager. Maybe designer, you're the product manager. Okay, designer, can you get copy ready for the footer? That's what it looks like to be scrappy. Everybody pitching in wherever you can. And at this point, it's all hands on deck. So let's stop for a minute to kind of think about that. When is the only time on a project, usually, that everybody is all hands on deck? It's at the end, when you're trying to launch, and it's 10 p.m., and you're like, I don't want to stay in this office anymore. I've eaten too much pizza. Everyone's working furiously. It's crunch time. Everybody's stressed out. If you can move that all hands on deck way up in the process, then you get all the benefit of that collaboration, except minus the stressed out part. And you could probably still eat pizza. Developer, what else do you need? Well, I'd love to know what that coming up section would be. You know, what are you thinking about for that? And the designer can say, oh, I was thinking that it could actually be like a bunch of cards that you swipe through horizontally. And what I would do normally is I pull out my phone out of my pocket, pull up the App Store. Oh yeah, kind of like that middle one. See the middle one there where you can just kind of swipe through? And that'll give the developer enough to go and prototype. Instead of making a few hours making a comp, we solved it together in just a few seconds. The magic words there are kind of like this. I'm often saying that with my developers. Kind of like this, kind of like this. Oh, kind of like this app, kind of like that site, kind of like that element, kind of like that component, kind of like this element in this design system. Right? Those are powerful words. Kind of like that gives developers enough to go on. Developer, what else do you need right now? Well, I'd like to know maybe what the header looks like. Okay, so me as designer, I have a very specific thing in my head that I can't describe. I don't have a sample of it. I can't do a good job articulating it because I'm the designer. I have this precious vision for this header. All right, so this is the time for a comp now. I don't have a kind of like example. I can't articulate it well. I can't write it out. So now's the time for a comp, but not a full comp, a spot comp. What's a spot comp? It's a comp of just one spot of the page, not the whole screen. So what I'll do is I'll describe what I can. All right, so I'm thinking it's kind of the logo on the left, and I have like a special thing in mind for the hamburger icon on the right, you know, that you could tap and open up the menu. But I want to show you what that would look like. So do a spot comp. You see the hamburger menu is special because I rounded the corners on it. It's just a spot, one spot of the screen. It's maybe 15 minutes of work, 5 minutes of work, I don't know, small. Take a screenshot, send it to the developer so it's waiting for them when they open it. Don't upload it to Zeppelin. It's literally the screenshot. It's on your clipboard, paste it in Slack or wherever, you know, just send a screenshot. That's all they need at that point. They don't need to know how big that thing is quite yet, right? It's just this thing over here, that thing over there. And while I was spending 15 minutes, 30 minutes spot comping the header, the developer has dropped in a scrolly card pattern thing that you can swipe through. Well, cool, we've got kind of an overflow pattern there that you can swipe through. And it doesn't matter that it's rounded corners yet, right? It's a prototype. Okay, cool, so that's working now. I can swipe through that. Now, designer just dropped off a spot comp for the header. While the developer's working on that spot comp and making that real, the designer might open the tokens file and start honing the details of these cards, right? So the cards have a background color token that's currently set to gray. Well, I can change that to green. I can also change it had a default drop shadow on it, but I can change the softness of that drop shadow if I want to in that tokens file. And maybe the typography is a token too, so I can start dropping in the proper typefaces and sizing them and deciding I want this to be small and gray and uppercase and small caps and all of that kind of stuff. While the developer's working on it, I'm working in this tokens file to do that level of work, getting the details right. The design details that normally we would leave for the developer to get to the last minute on the last day of the project, and we don't have time to get those in, and designers, we get all pissy about it. Oh, you didn't do this thing. Yeah, because I was building the freaking site. And while the designer's working on those token details, the developer pushes too, and now we've got the header in. The header's built out. And while the developer was working on getting that header in, the designer started pulling in different colors for different variations of cards. I'm not going to take this much further here, but hopefully you get the idea. After a few hours of this, right, this is maybe an hour, 2, 3 worth of work together, sitting together. Hopefully you get the idea. After a few hours of this, you can see how a team might collaboratively build out a whole screen, or maybe even a whole app. And that may be the same amount of time. If we talk about 3 hours or 4 hours, that's the same amount of time it would have taken me to go into Sketch, make a mobile comp, and a tablet comp, and a desktop comp, and then send that to the developer, and now the developer starts their work 3 hours later. In 3, 4 hours, we built the whole thing already. And guess what? It's responsive by default, because the web is responsive by default. So we get all that benefit by designing in the browser. With this method, you get everything in the browser as early as possible, and then you get the bonus of a responsive working environment while being way closer to making the software work. Eric mentioned this yesterday, that a 2-hour prototype with CSS Grid showed the team, oh, this is not the right direction to go in. That is so valuable in this kind of in-browser collaborative workflow kind of way. Right? Eric put it perfectly. He's like, it's like having superpowers. Right? Building something this fast, seeing it come to life this fast, changing it that quickly, it is like superpowers. Una mentioned it too. Communication is multi-directional. Right? Let's not fool ourselves into thinking that what we're doing is real communication, much less collaboration. This kind of process is what it looks like to make the communication multi-directional. Jen Simmons mentioned it too. She said we should acknowledge that web developers are finishing design in the browser. They are designers. She's totally right. I'm going to build on that here by saying, designers, if you don't want to give that control up, take it back. Work with your developers. Own the tokens file. Learn some code. You don't want to hand that over to somebody else because you want to micromanage that? Great, do it. Everyone would welcome it. No one would complain. You want to take some work off the developer's shoulders? By all means, go for it. If you're interested in the details of this process, Brad, who you saw earlier today, Brad and I released a video of us using this workflow to start redesigning the Pattern Lab website. The video is about 2 hours long, and we go over a lot of the nuances that I didn't have time to cover here. And while this video shows the kinds of things that designers and developers can do together, Brad also did a follow-up video to show what kinds of things developers can do on their own and individually as part of this process. So it's not that you have to sit together all the time to do this 100% of the project. There's group time and there's alone time. And so Brad kind of shows how you do that. And we'll do a couple more follow-ups to this as we get time. And if anybody thinks this is useful for their teams to kind of dive in detail into this, we're going to be teaching this as a day-long workshop all across 2019. So keep your eye on our Twitter feeds and our blogs, and we'll be announcing stuff like that. Now, this process showed what it could look like between designer and developer. And just to keep the example simple, it was just those two disciplines. But this certainly scales in a few different ways. So the first way it scales is it scales to other disciplines. It's not just designers and developers. The same way that I showed design continually flowing into this developer's work, so can research, information architecture, copy, and evolving API. All of those things flow right in, and that's part of building a good product. Now, Alex Schleifer, he's the VP of design at Airbnb. He describes it like this. He says the team, and he represents it as a stool, EPD, referring to engineering, product, and design. He said the team should resemble a 3-legged stool, in which each leg represents one of the 3 areas that help build a product. If it's done from the start, each function can grow in parallel and proper ratio as the broader organization scales. So he suggests scaling these at the same time, right? And without those strategies from the outset, you're bound to create an unstable stool, right? So if you're heavy on engineering and product but not design, and you're slowly growing design, you start with this unstable stool. Right? A waterfall process is like building a stool, 1 leg at a time. We start with product, then we do design, then we do engineering. The only time that the stool is stable is at the very end. Otherwise, it's just always lopsided, right? Because you're doing 1 leg at a time. Instead, following a workflow like this, like the one that I just showed, keeps the stool growing steady at an equivalent pace. Now, another way that this scales is through organization and team size. That's another consideration of scale. So while I share these concepts, and I basically say that this works on a small team, when I share this with larger teams, they're like, well, we've got 100 people in our design organization. How does this actually work? We have 100 engineers here. How do we actually do this? And it's a good question. And the truth is, it doesn't scale to a 100-person team. The science actually works against you. Right? If you have a team of 3 people, there are only 3 communication points needed for those 3 people to stay connected. If you add 1 more person to that team, a 4th person, the amount of connection doubles to 6. And you see how quickly the complexity increases. On a 12-person team, you need 66 lines of connection. And trying to sustain this is the wrong problem to solve. That's not the right scaling problem to solve. So how do you solve it? Well, instead of having a 12-person team that you're trying to do this workflow in, if you break it up into 2 teams of 6, you only need 30 connections, right? 15 and 15, as opposed to a 12-person team needing 66 points of connections. Same number of people, but the scale works against you. So instead of figuring out how to scale the process, see how you might reduce the scale to utilize this process. That's the way to manage it. Now, usually when I share these tips and tricks with a new team, front-end developers are pretty excited and can't wait to try it out. The designers, on the other hand, man, we're a finicky bunch. They often put up a bit of resistance. Now, there's usually 2 reasons that I see resistance from designers on this process, and I think both are worth addressing, although in very different ways. The first one, as you might imagine, is ego. Some designers think they just rule the team. It's my vision. I made this thing. And this deserves to be dealt with quickly and sternly, I think. There's no room for ego on a collaborative team. It is toxic. If you're a manager, tell your little precious that they can shape up or ship out. Now, no matter how much you think you need them on the team, it's probably because they're stifling the rest of the team. If you get rid of them, you likely will see your team step up to the challenge because now they have more room to shine, honestly. Now, the second reason I get more pushback is much more understandable because lots of people don't even realize that it's happening. And there are usually 4 types of responses that I get when I share this kind of workflow with the team. The first reason that I get is something like, well, there's no way that this kind of process would work here, right? And they say a bunch of reasons. Another thing I hear is, I mean, why do we even need to change things in the first place? Things were working all right. I mean, we know that it could be faster or better, but it's not that bad, is it? The third reason is, well, okay, well, what if we only try this new process on projects where we have extra time? On our real projects, we'll do our old process, and on the kind of side projects, we'll do this one. And the last one is, well, I don't know, I mean, even if it works, it's not like it's going to make anything better here. And these sentiments may look familiar to some of you, and there's a reason for that. And here are some hints. Each of these things are representative of these kinds of feelings: denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. Now, what are these signs of? Anybody know? That's right, these are signs of grief. And when does one grieve? They grieve when they experience loss. And what did they lose? Designers lose their identity when you tell them to change this process, right? The thing that they've been good at for years and years is making boxes and buttons and forms. You tell somebody you're not allowed to use Sketch anymore. You're not allowed to use Zeppelin. You're not allowed to draw boxes. You're not allowed to make forms or buttons. And what did their career become? Right? I've met many a designer that has said to us in an interview, for the last 4 years, I've been designing buttons and forms. You want to make a design system to take this away from me? I'm going to fight you. So many designers have their worth tied to the output that they create, namely comps. And for good reason, right? It's the biggest dopamine hit around for a designer. You make a comp really quickly, you show a bunch of people, they're like, that's dope. Yeah. Multiply that by the number of years that they've been doing this as a designer, and it is increasingly more ingrained. Now, all of a sudden, some dude like me comes in and says, don't do that, do something else, and trust somebody else with that job. Now what do they do? Now who are they? Now who do they become? So, if designers are losing their old identities because of this approach, let's give them new ones. One of my favorite exercises to do with designers in introducing this kind of working style is this one. I get them all in a room, and I ask them to think about their most recent project or two. And regarding those projects, I'll ask them to list all the things they wish they hadn't gotten to, or they wish they had gotten to, but didn't have time for on that last project. Usually there's a little pause. Well, no, I don't know. It went well. And then a couple people start scribbling, right? And what they write down is stuff like, oh, I wish I could have gotten to that animation. I wish we could have done more on the illustration of that. I wish we could have created a typed scale on that project. I wish we could have done an interface inventory. I wish we could have, all these things. I wish we could have made a custom icon set instead of using the stock one that we bought last year. I wish I would have put more time into documenting that so other designers could use it better. Right? This list gets longer and longer and longer. And also what grows in addition is excitement too. Right? Designers start to see, oh, this is what we're not able to get to. And if we just trade in what we were doing before, we get to do that stuff now. Right? Finally, it'll dawn on them. It's not writing on the wall. It's the opposite. This is opportunity. There's opportunity to grow, to further explore interests that have not been charted recently. And so to get people on board with a new process, you have to find the incentive for them. Otherwise, for them, it's just all risk and a little upside. Some of you have probably seen this study before. 2013, a team in Google's people operations, that's their HR department, they set out to determine what makes for effective teams at Google. And the lead researcher, Julia Rosowski, she reports her findings. She says, we were pretty confident that what we would find is the perfect team, the perfect mix of individual traits and skills for a stellar team. Essentially, people that have been doing this a while. Instead, what they found is that who is on a team matters way less than how the team members interact, structure their work, and view their contributions. And of all the factors involved, what was the one that emerged as the most important? Anybody know? Psychological safety. They found that individuals on teams with higher psychological safety are less likely to leave Google. They're more likely to harness the power of diverse teams. They're more likely to bring in more revenue, and they're rated as twice as effective by executives. Now, all the stuff that I talked about before, it wasn't just to make design and development better and faster. It is that too, but it's also so that our jobs are more exciting, more fulfilling, more fun, more innovative, and all of that starts with psychological safety, knowing that you're all in it together and you have each other's backs. So what can you do right away to start creating more safety in your team? Well, maybe you can kick off your team meetings by sharing a risk that you took the previous week. Maybe you encourage your manager to make that part of your daily stand-ups. Maybe if your manager won't do it, maybe you just start doing it anyway. Hey, I'd like to add this piece. I'll tell you what I did yesterday, today, what my blockers are, and a risk that I've taken. Right? And you'll watch that catch on. After a couple days, watch that catch on. As we wrap up here, I'd love for you to think about what you can do at your job to not isolate yourself or others, but instead be of more service to each other. Right? Like the show Lost would always remind us, live together, die alone. In summary, strive to change the dynamics of your work to be in more service to each other. Celebrate your front-end developers. Treat all of your team members as equals. That's how we achieve better work, better teams, and better lives. Thanks very much.